Last time Joel Kovel was here speaking at the Brecht Forum, he was employed. Barely. He was the professor at Bard College, and he made the mistake of writing a book called Overcoming Zionism, which proposed a one-state solution in Palestine, where everybody who lives there would be an equal citizen. And the book was published by Pluto Press and distributed at the University of Michigan, from the University of Michigan Press. A Christian Zionist organization called attention to the book. They pressured the University of Michigan Press, and they banned the book. They took it off its email. They wouldn't sell it. They wouldn't ship it. They wouldn't list it. And that was the beginning of the Committee for Open Discussion of Zionism. We got the book back on the list and made them sell it. But the Zionist lobby was implacable. They kept up their agitation. They got the Board of Regents to lean on the University of Michigan Press. And so although we restored the book to their list, the next year they banned Pluto Press from being distributed by the University of Michigan Press. And they were making over $1 million a year distributing the books from Pluto Press. But they banned it nonetheless. And Joel's book had to get on a different channel. The next year, the same kind of atmosphere caused Bard College to refuse to renew Joel's contract. They told him, if you agree not to criticize us, then we will grant you Professor Emeritus status. So I'm going to introduce Joel as a Professor non-emeritus. Or a non-professor emeritus. Joel's book, Overcoming Zionism, is a very important book, and I urge you all to get it.
One quick postscript. The University of Michigan Press has collapsed as a result of this case. Take pleasure. One doesn't like to be vengeful, but there are limits.
And Joel was honored in Milwaukee by a group last Saturday for being fired from Bard. Yeah. Equally courageous is Shlomo Sand. He's a professor at the University of Tel Aviv. The subject of his book, The Invention of the Jewish People, he can't teach this at the university. His status there in the future, we're not sure of. It's an extraordinarily interesting book. I've been waiting for tonight to buy a copy. They're on sale in the back. This is the book party to launch it here in New York City. I've got a flight out to the Lawyers Guild convention tomorrow afternoon, so I got 6 hours alone to read the book. I can't wait. I've read lots of reviews of it, and it's really just a wonderful piece of scholarship, I think. So without any more comments, let me ask Shlomo to speak, and then when he's done, Joel's going to comment on it, and then we're going to have questions and comments from the audience. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming out in this lousy weather.
Okay. Thank you to give me the occasion to speak about my book here. I will excuse for all the mistakes that I'm going to do in English.
Talking to the mic.
Okay. Okay. I prefer to speak Hebrew. I imagine that a lot of people here are Jews and consider themselves as a part of the Jewish people. Then we have a common language that is the Hebrew. You agree that I will speak in Hebrew? No. Okay, then maybe in Yiddish. No? Maybe How about Yiddish? Or French, a very Jewish language. Now, you see, I hope that you will read the book. Then I don't want to make it, a short resumation, and then I'm afraid that you will not buy the book. But anyway, I will try to explain this evening why I wrote this book, and also what I try to achieve in this book. Okay, very shortly. I hope that it will be questions that I can, make it more clearer, the things that I am trying to explain in the book. I wrote the book because I have a full professorship and I wasn't afraid. You see, this is the first reason writing this book. It's difficult to get a full professorship writing a book like this in Israel. But when I got the full professorship, I decided not to be afraid and to write this book. As you heard before, I have not the right to write a book about Zionism because my profession is Western civilization history in the Tel Aviv University, because it is another department that is dealing with the Jewish history. Then I decided to break every rules of the game in the historical studies and to write a book about Jewish history. Now, it was a long time that I put questions, but I remember 8 years ago, I still used the word Jewish people. It was so natural for me to use the word Jewish people. Belong other expressions, other concepts in Jewish history. For example, the exile. The time when I was a young leftist, I continued to believe that once upon a time, a Jewish people was expelled from Palestine and started to walk, in the countries till Moscow, make a U-turn and come back to Jerusalem. Really, a long time, I was sure that this kind of history is the real history of the Jewish people. And I think that a lot of people continue to think about it. Then I started to study differently Jewish history, really differently. I started with simple questions. The Bible is a historical book or a religious book? And I discovered that the Bible became a historical book very lately. I mean, only in the 19th century, in the second half of the 19th century, people started to consider the Bible as a historical book. You have to know that the first historian of Jewishness didn't use the Bible as the beginning of a Jewish people. The first historians in the 19th century that started to write about Jewish history didn't use the Bible as the first chapter of the Jewish history. Then I took a lot of achievements of Israeli archaeologues about the true and the not true in the Bible. I remember the day that I heard the first time that the Exodus, the Egyptian Exodus, didn't happen. I remember that I was shocked. I grew up in Israel, I studied. From, I think, 6 years old, the Bible has a historical book. You understand? It was so natural for me. And suddenly to hear that the exodus of the Jewish didn't happen. And the kingdom of David and Solomon never exist. You can imagine the impact. It was 10 years ago, and maybe 12 years ago, the first time that I heard about it. Then I decided the archaeologues they are not a good historians. It's not a joke. They can be a very good archaeologist, but they were bad historians, and I started to work on their achievements, on their field of achievements. And I wanted to write a book about the beginning of the Jewish history in the 19th century, dealing with the Bible. It was my first step. You see, taking the Bible and showing how Jewish history was constructed with the Bible. Later, I remember the day that I was thinking about the exile. I read a little article about the exile with the assumption that the exile was a myth. It never happened. I'm speaking about the exile of when the Romans took away the Jewish people from Palestine, Judah, and they started to walk everywhere to create the diaspora. And I remember going to the library, Tel Aviv library, looking for books about the exile, the act of exile, the historical exile. And I didn't find even one book. Can you imagine? The exile is so central in the Jewish history, no? It's the raison d'être of the Jewish diaspora, okay? You can imagine that me, that were sure all my life that the Jewish were expelled from Palestine, discovering there is not even one book of research about the exile. You can imagine something like this? I'm sure that here, even if you are leftist, Marxist, I don't know exactly what, but I'm sure that a lot of you are sure that the Jews were expelled from Palestine 2,000 years ago, no? Yeah. It's something that not only Israelis, not only Jews, everybody knows that the Jews were expelled from Palestine. It's so deep in the historical consciousness of everybody in the Western world. You can imagine a historian, a professor in history, is going to the library, an Israeli professor of history is going to the library to look after books about the exile. And he didn't find one book. It's a paradox, a kind of paradox, no? After it, I decided to ask specialists from the Jewish department history, what is about the exile? Why I'm not finding one book about the exile? And it's very interesting from technical point of view. You see, most of the specialists of the Jewish antiquity knew that the exile didn't happen. I was surprised. You know, I'm a historian. And I asked them, what do you mean the exile wasn't happening? It wasn't exactly an exile. It was a kind of, you saw, emigration. No. I was shocked. Going out from the office of the historians, asking students what they know about the Jewish exile, everybody was sure that the exile happened. Even in our money, 50 shekel. You know, the shekel is our money. Dollars also, but we are using sometimes the shekels. In the shekels, there is written that the sentence of Agnon, when he got the Nobel Prize, saying that we are a people that was exiled by Titus. You say Titus in English, yeah? Titus, sorry. Then I understood that there is a difference between the historical profession, university historical profession, in collective memory. In the kind of, how we call it, the technology of diffusing historical consciousness is very complicated. Not only in Israel, in all the Western world. You can imagine, every historian of the Jewish antiquity knows that the exile didn't happen. Most of the people are sure that the exile happened. And then I started to work about it, and there is the third chapter in my book is about how the exile was constructed in the Jewish memory. I'm speaking about the historical event, not about the metaphysical conception of exile that's very deep in Jewish belief. You understand the difference? But exile in Jewishness is not a physical present. You understand me? It's a metaphysical. If you want later, I will answer to the questions. Exile in Jewishness is very important. Has a metaphysical notion, not as a historical event. You understand the difference? What the Zionism did with a lot of success? They took the paradigm, if I can use the word, this terrible word, the paradigm of Jewishness, of the existence of exile, and the contrary of exile is what? In the Jewish belief, in the Jewish religion, there is exile. The opposite of exile is what? What? Return. No. In Jewishness, the opposite of exile is redemption. Redemption, sorry. You have to understand how brilliant Zionism was and is till now. Jewishness defined exile in opposition to the redemption. The Zionism took this paradigm and they changed it. The opposite of exile is a fatherland. In Jewishness, it wasn't a fatherland. Zion, Palestine, wasn't a place to go back, to return. It was a holy place, a very important holy place, that once, in the end of the days, when the Messiah will come, everybody will come back to Zion, to Jerusalem. Everybody is not only the live people, it's also the dead people. Jewish, for a long time, came to Zion, to Jerusalem, to die, not to live. By the way, the father of my grandfather, he bought a ticket at the beginning of the 20th century and decided to go to Palestine to die. He didn't left nothing to his sons. He took everything, buy a tomb, how we say? A tomb and a ticket, and left to Palestine. Not to live in Palestine, because he wasn't a Zionist. To die in Palestine. You understand the difference? He was the guys that cut you in the road from the right. You know, he wanted to be one of the first one with the redemption to wake up in Jerusalem. It's not a joke. This is Jewishness. You understand me? Now, what Zionism did is fantastic. They changed the paradigm and they put opposition to the exile, the return, the physical return to Zion. I deal with this notion of exile in the 3rd chapter of my book. Now, if the Jewish were not exiled from Palestine, there is 2 questions that I put before myself. First of all, what happened with the population in Palestine? If the Jewish were not exiled, not emigrate, what happened with the Jew in the place? Second question, why there are so many Jews in the world? From where come there so many Jews? Now, about the first question, what happened with the population in place if they were not exiled by the Romans? And then I discovered that the first Zionists in Palestine, at the beginning of the 20th century, believed that the Arab peasants in place are the real descendant of the old ancient Hebrew. I don't know if you know the name of Yitzhak ben Tzvi, the 2nd president of Israel. I don't know if you know the name of Israel Belkin, the first Zionist coming to Palestine, Israel Belkin. But you know the name of David Ben-Gurion, no? Even the Palestinian children know the name. The 3 of them and a lot of others believe at the beginning of the 20th century that the people living in Palestine are the direct descendant of the old Jew. You can imagine it? I remember lecturing in El Quds, and it was a problem for a lot of Hamasnik. You see? So they become mixed a little bit, you see. Now, with the first revolt of 29, Zionism decided to make other borders to define a new nation. You understand me? They took them out with the first reaction of the natives against the Zionist colonization. But the same people that wrote about Arab peasant as Jew in 47 changed completely the paradigm in the declaration of the State of Israel. The same people. that knew at the beginning of the century that the exile didn't exist, in 47, when they wrote the declaration of the new state, they are speaking about the exile, they are speaking about the return, because if there wasn't exile, what is about the return? What is about all this mythology of the Zionism? Now, a lot of people are asking me, then you believe that the Palestinians are the old Jew? I mean, the descendant of the old Jew? No, I think that, this place, this area, a lot of conquerors passed there and left their, how we say? Seed. Okay? And I explained to the Palestinians are not pure Jew. But the chance that the Palestinian is a descendant of the old Hebrew is much more than me. Why? Because I work a lot about the way that the Jewish monotheism started to work in this field of proselytism. It was the first monotheism in the Western world that was proselyte. Proselyte, you say? Proselyte. Everybody knows that the Jewish is a kind of religion close on itself, no? 400 years, 500 years, this monotheism prepared the way to the birth of the Christianism by working as a proselyte. And I wrote a lot about this. Now, I make it short. Most of the Jews in the beginning of our era came from conversion. And I try to prove in my book. It's not so bad, huh? Now, not only people were converted to Judaism, it was also kingdoms. It was also a lot of tribes. From the Maghreb, North Africa, till the Black Sea, we can find 3, 4, or 5 kingdoms that were converted to Judaism. And I try to show it in my book using mostly Zionist historians that knew all this information, but trying to put it in the marge of the construction of collective memory. Most of the material that I worked on it is Zionist material, the work of Zionists. I didn't discover nothing new. I organized differently a knowledge, a historical knowledge. You understand it? Yeah. Now, the last chapter, to be short and to give Kovel to speak and to criticize me, the last chapter is less historical and much more political. Showing in all the book that the Jewish are not a people, are not an ethnic, you understand, ethnos, I decided to write the last chapter to see the paradox, the contradiction, the deep contradiction of the Zionism, that they build in 47, 48, not a republic, not a democratic state, but they build what I called in the book, after others that use the term, ethnocracy and not a democracy. You understand me? And I finishing the book by stressing the fact that even if so many people believe that Israel is a democracy, it's far away to be a democracy from the beginning. The first definition of democracy, before speaking about political pluralism, all these things, the first thing is that a state belongs to its citizens. You agree with it, no? From 47 till 2009, Israeli power defines itself as a Jewish state. There is a deep contradiction between the notion of a Jewish state and the notion of democracy. Why? Because if you say that the state belongs to the Jewish people, then it belongs much more to Madoff or Joe Lieberman, I don't know, or some of you, than Arab students I am teaching before them, that are Israeli citizens, but the state didn't belong to them. It doesn't belong to them. You understand the contradiction? Then the last chapter, I try to explain that all the rhetoric, legitimation of Zionism, calling Israel a democratic state, all this rhetoric, all this discourse, it's funny for me. Israel is not a democratic state. You have to understand, basically. And this is the reason I think that the chances that Israel to exist in the Middle East are not very great. You understand me? Now, a quarter of the population in Israel is defining themselves, the state defined them as not Jew. A quarter. 20% are Arabs. In the Galilee, the north part of Israel, they are the majority. I mean, the Arabs are the majority. If tomorrow they will decide that they want to build their own state, because Israel is a Jewish state, you can imagine the Galilee become a kind of Kosovo state. Why not? You understand me? If the state is a Jewish state, they have the full right to declare themselves as an autonomic state different from the Jewish state. But I'm afraid that arriving to this point, and I think in 10, 15 years, in Avigdor Lieberman is right by his, diagnosis. This contradiction will destroy the Israeli state, I think. But I don't believe that Galilee will become an independent state. I think it will finish with a mass murder. Gaza, Jenin is nothing what can happen in Galilee tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Shlomo. Joel Kovel is going to comment on his presentation, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Joel?
Thank you. Briefly, I hope, though there's so much that this book brings to mind that it just doesn't feel right to talk briefly about it. But I will. I only met Shlomo this evening, and I only started reading his book a week ago because it's just being released in the United States, and I didn't have the opportunity. Only a few of us have been reading it. I wanted to say a few words about that because I knew a lot about it since it was 2007, was it first?
No, 8.
8, all right.
February 8.
And I've been giving a lot of thought to this question, and some of my thoughts ran along these lines, but I realized that when this book came out that here was someone who had unlocked an enormous amount for us to work on and to work through. This thesis, simple, something that may have flitted through our minds, it flitted through my mind. I mean, after I spent a few years pondering the subject and wrote this book, which has ups and downs and all that. It's neither here nor there. But the point is that even I, in writing this book, Overcoming Zionism, continued to fall for some of that story, that there was such a thing as a Jewish people. I mean, I look at the first chapter or two of the book, and I talk about the Jewish people did this and the Jewish people did that. And of course, I really didn't know that. It was a received knowledge and a way of knowing that had been internalized without any critical reflection, because, as he shows in a brilliant chapter of the book called Myth History, it's the way it was written about, and what is written about, particularly in a culture that calls itself that of the people of the book, that has extraordinary power of texts and the written word, it has the aura of truth, and if it's repeated often enough, it becomes, well, it must be true. And yet, even in the back of our mind, the thought is, well, were there really such a people? Was there really a diaspora? You know, that kind of explode and go out from that center of Jerusalem and then somehow get called back in? I mean, what about the rest of the Jews in the Roman Empire? Where did they go after Emperor Titus? You know, did they take off? Is that sort of a centrifugal notion, and then centripetal, like that yo-yo theory of the history of the Jews, which is required to synthesize the idea of a people? You know, and then the question of the conversions. I mean, I think I'm going to go into business and publish, print up buttons and say, you know, I'm a Khazar and proud of it. You know? Khazars being one of the what Bibles say major conversion experiences. Central Asians. Arthur Koestler wrote about it. All of these things are enormously important, and I was really looking forward to reading the book, and when I started reading the book a week ago, and I've only read 130 pages, so I'm not competent to judge on the whole book, but I can tell you what I've read is marvelous. Not only is not any sense of letdown, but it's much better than I thought it was going to be. Some of us might find it a little slow getting started, and I want you to bear that in mind. There's a long chapter at the beginning, which I rather liked a lot, because I ponder questions of nationalism and identity and things, and I thought he did a brilliant job of putting that chapter together. But if you want to read about these narratives that have been so influential in world history, it's going to take a little while to get into that. You can, I guess, start in the second chapter, but I urge you to be patient. The other thing that I found remarkable, because I knew nothing about this man, except what I read in some interviews and some reviews, some of which were comical in their dismissal of his work, was what a wonderful writer he is. And you don't think so? You're not supposed to think so. I can tell you that. I know from good writing, and he's a marvelous writer. He has a touch that is sort of gentle, but extremely compelling at the same time, and very, very funny, very amusing. He lets the epigones and the voices of the Zionist experience speak for themselves, and their discourse just collapses before your eyes. He doesn't have to raise his voice. He shows it. It's at least in the part I've read up to now, it's a marvel of just a very, very calm, reflective approach that takes the argument, shows its internal contradictions, and lets it collapse of its own accords, and then lets us find our way anew. Now, this is a very important point. When the state of Israel came into being, came trailing clouds of glory. These clouds have turned out to be successive exhalations of myth, and it's been the work of the critical intelligence to dismantle those myths. I can just say I know of two others that have been very influential in leading up to this, and one is Ze'ev Sternhel's book, The Founding Myths of Israel, where he basically deconstructed the idea that Israel had in any sense a truly socialist orientation, or that it was a left-wing state, and that you could have a national socialism, which of course is a Nazi term, but nonetheless that's what they were talking about. And he dismantled, deconstructed, if you like, the socialist pretensions. And then there's the myth of the 1948 so-called wars of liberation. All the stories we were fed. These were dismantled by many, including some dubious characters like Benny Morris, but most splendidly by Ilan Pappé. The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine is a book at this level, because after having read it, you cannot accept that foundational tale, the origins of the Jewish state. But I think this one goes deeper, because it really cuts into the very notion of what it's all about, to be Jewish and to have an identity of this sort. The identity, of course, is very real. It's very, very real. Nobody will dispute that, but it's not what it makes itself out to be. In other words, it's real, but it's based upon certain falsehoods, and that's terribly important. I think of Marx when I read this book. My favorite quotation from Marx this is a letter from him to Arnold Ruger in 1843. They were starting working on the Deutsche Französische Jahrbuch, and Marx tells his friend Ruger, he says, look, we can't, I'm paraphrasing, of course, we can't see what is going to happen. Nobody can predict the future. We have one strength on our hands, and that is ruthless criticism. Ruthless criticism. We must criticize ruthlessly everything that exists. And we must be unafraid of our own conclusions and unafraid of the powers that be. And I think Shlomo Sand has done a fantastic job of ruthless criticism. Now, ruthlessness is not a nice word. It means having no pity, having no, sentimental attachment to any sort. Just go there and do it. But I want to emphasize something. Criticism is about taking apart ideas and ideologies. Ideas have no rights. An idea does not have a right. You can kill an idea. And we have to have the faith, and it's a well-grounded faith, that in dismantling ideas, we will be freed. And so the question now before us is that the State of Israel, having from the one side gone through this demythologization process, which I think is culminated in this book, and from the other revealed, and I think those are not disconnected, revealed a kind of a malignancy within, revealed a kind of a death wish, a nihilism, right? Which became manifest in many ways, but never more shockingly than in the early weeks of this year in Gaza. I think that this is a conjoined process of the demythologization on the one side and the increasing barbarism of the State of Israel on the other. And I think if you understand the mythic basis of this state, you'll see that the barbarism is inherent in it. Israel is not a normal state. It's a state built upon the fulfillment of a kind of narrative, which is not a true narrative, but which takes on a compelling truth. And the falsehood of what has to be held as true is something that drives them forward into crimes. And not just drives them into crimes, but they also feel that nobody can judge these crimes. They're the only ones who can judge these crimes. The whole logic of the exceptionalism, the fact that the Jew has a different DNA, even as some of the Haredim have said in Israel, and certainly a different set of moral standards, which of course is higher than the moral standards of all other peoples. All of that is part of this identity, and all of this is coming crashing down. And I think when the story is really written, and the historian of the future will look at the Israeli state, and I believe, perhaps Shlomo can expand a little bit, but I certainly believe that the state of Israel does not have much of a future. And maybe people of my age will not live to see it, but the level of contradiction is so great. The things that are happening there, the alienation from the rest of the world, the disaffection of the world's people, even as the world's powerful powers flock around it, is heading towards a cliff, kind of an abyss. And I believe that when that breakup occurs, and it could occur in the most horrendous way, because you have the Samson option, as Seymour Hersh put, or the Masada complex. Well, we're going to go under, we'll take everybody else with us, and we have enough nuclear weapons to do it. So that's one side of it. And the other side is the possibility of breaking loose, breaking free of the tyranny of this kind of a narrative that has held its sway for so many centuries. And when that happens, I really do believe that this book and the man sitting at the other end of this table will be honored for their contribution to the necessary breakup of that mythology. Thank you.
I'm going to ask people for their comments or questions. The only ground rule is keep it short, and I'm not going to call on anybody until everybody else has had a chance to speak. So with that,
not going to call on anybody again. Huh? You're not going to call on anybody again.
Again.
Yes.
Okay. Otherwise, I'm going to call on Harold Chandler first, but Joel, I'd like to hear your reflections as well.
I'd like to read it.
Okay.
I love what both of our speakers said. Harold?
No, the book is published in English now. Has it been out? What's the reaction in terms of the people in that part of the world to the earlier edition of it? And does it make a difference in the language? I'm just wondering the reaction of the society to the book.
Which society? Israeli? French?
Israeli. In Israel. Yeah.
There is not a reaction of society. There is a reaction of intellectuals, of cultural agents. You see, I don't know what the Israeli society is thinking about the book. Now, to be much more clear, the reception of the book in Israel was weird. Why weird? Because the media was very happy with the book. I was invited to 11 talk shows. Really, it was not bad reception. And because of this reception of the media, the book became a bestseller for 19 weeks. Who bought the book, I don't know. I think it's more or less young people, no? I quite sure from Tel Aviv, mostly, not from Jerusalem, and not from Ashdod. This is the reason that I'm not speaking about society, but I'm speaking about a cultural group. The reception is very complicated. I cannot know exactly. Now, the reaction of the historians, the official historians of Judaism, was bad. You see, very aggressive, and I think they were right. They fight for their existence. I mean, their intellectual existence as historians. They react badly, and it's not so easy in the university now, walking in the corridors and meet them. You understand? They know that before that I am not a Zionist, they know that I participate in political action, it's all okay. But the minute that I touch something deep of Jewish national identity, the reaction was very, very difficult. And there is sitting here a student of mine that experienced it with one of the historians that critic my book. No? Now, in France, it was different. I mean, the media hesitate a lot. The press, didn't want to write nothing. It was fantastic. Not Le Monde, Libération, Le Figaro, L'Humanité. You know what L'Humanité is? The journal of nobody had the courage to speak about the book. It was only the Le Monde Diplomatique, the only organ that reacts to the book. They give me a place. But people started to buy the book. It very quick became a bestseller that nobody has the courage to speak about. by the way, is the most, I would say, the historical book, the most popular historical book in France last year.
Wow.
Without any critic in the big press. But what happened, that changed a little bit the reception, was the Gaza war. A lot of, how we say it, pro-Israeli circles of the left, pro-Zionist of the left, felt very badly with the Gaza war. It was too much. Then I remember giving one of an interview that I critiqued this war. I had immediately a lot of reaction, positive reaction from kind of left, you see, like Nouvel Observateur. Do you know? Nouvel Observateur is a very famous journal in France. And they started to act positively more and more and more. And then they started to speak. It became a little bit legitimate. L'Express, for example, make an interview with me. You understand? Then, how I say, grâce à I have to thank Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak is the guy that planned and actually did this war of the Gaza war. I was like, because I'm speaking in a Brecht Forum, I'm like Mother Courage, you know. I profit really from the war of the Gaza. It's become much more legitimate because of the war of Gaza in France. I answer you more or less on the question. There is other levels. It's not so simple, yes. I don't know what will happen in the future because I cannot be fired from the university. It's, I don't think that somebody is thinking, but donor, you know, say donor, French Jewish donor, started to send letters to the Tel Aviv president, university, the president of the Tel Aviv University, saying that I have to be fired. If not, they will stop to give money. And they are right, I think. Okay, I think that I answered.
But just add something, because what Harold, your book has this fact that I didn't realize, and not many others, about there being parallel history departments within Israeli universities.
This is why I didn't have a right to write about Jewish history, but because I belong, you know, from 1936, before the establishment of the Israeli state, Zionism had a university, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. It was established in 1925. In 1936, it's very important, 2 years after the Nuremberg laws in Germany, it is a discussion in the university to establish a historical department. The decision was that they cannot establish one historical department like in Sorbonne, like in Oxford, like in Cambridge, because the history of the Jewish are completely different than other people. They are a people. But we have to build, they said it. We have the reports of the discussion. Jewish history cannot be mixed with the Goy's history. You know what is Goy? Everybody in New York know what is a Goy. No, it's not a joke. Till now, there is not any department of history in Israel. There is only general history department. It's Western department. By the way, there is also Near East department, historical department, you know, because the history of the Arabs has also to be, you know, completely different. I'm not speaking about centers. I'm not speaking about chairs. I'm speaking about departments. Somebody can finish history studies in my department without knowing one thing about Jewish history. By the way, there is 12, last year it was 12 students in the Jewish history department and 120 in the general history. Then you understand, you know, the power relationship is not so bad because most of the students are not going to the Jewish historical department because I don't think that it's a real historical department. Yes?
I had a question based on one of the critiques in Anita Shapira's review of the
Yeah.
book, where she specifically singles out why it is that you
of Anthony Smith and the idea of ethnos and ethnicity in the theoretical chapter at the beginning. And I wonder this too when I was reading it, because in a way, if you think about the flip side and you think about Palestinian national identity and Palestinian consciousness, Rashid Khalidi's model of how that develops is very much rooted in Smith. And why is it that it can be the case that there is something to ethnos or ethnicity that in modern times Jews invent or create a nation state based on certain cultural realities or the ways in which they live their lives. And yet there's, that's an invention like every other nationalism. Why is it that in this context, Smith is sort of dismissed as a model?
I'm speaking of Smith. I think is the worst Theoretian of nationalism. Because he tried criteria of nation with the Jewish presence in history. Now, I critique the notion of ethnicity because I think that it's not a real historical concept. I think that after the Second World War, a lot of people stopped to use the word race and they replaced it by ethnicity. It was chic, ethnicity. Why not? You have to know that till 1945, the word was race. Now, Anthony Smith is a poor theoretian of nationalism. And I try a little bit to show it in my book. He put criteria about the relationship with ethnicity and nation that I cannot accept. It's not serious. You understand me? The fact that Rashid Khalidi used Smith, it's his problem. I stopped to follow not only Zionists, also some Palestinian historians. Because every nationalism, and to create nation in the 19th century, and also in the 20th century, you needed to invent to the past people. You understand me? Or ethnicity, as you want. But people in ethnicity was invented by nationalists of modern times. The same thing is about the Palestinian. I don't think that 100 years ago existed a Palestinian people. More and more now, after writing this book, I started to get courage to say that even in 1948, I am not believe that the Palestinian people was a real existence in history. You understand me? Now, Zionism invented a Jewish people in a modern sense of a people. What is the modern sense of a people? It's a group of human beings that had in common practical norms, secular, cultural, practical cultural norms, you understand? But secular. If it's not secular, it's a kind of religion. But the Zionism, and I try all this book, try to invent a Jewish people. I think that a lot of Palestinian historians are doing the same thing. Sometimes they're going to the, how we call it, the Plishtim, the old Palestine, how we use it? Philistines. I met Palestinian historians that say that they are the real descendant of the old Palestine. The same thing. And Rashid Khalidi will I don't believe, like Edward Said, that he will admit that in 1948, the question of a Palestinian people is not so simple. By the way, it doesn't change my historical analysis that Zionism was a kind of colonization to push away a population. People or not people, it doesn't change. The idea of Zionism to build a Jewish state in a place that the majority are not Jew. You understand me? But Rashid Khalidi is the same thing like, I think in this part of his writings, he's like the Zionist. And I think that Ernest Gellner, Benedict Anderson, and a lot of others that I use them in my book, and I give them all the debt that I have to them, they open my mind about, speaking about, historians, and it's not a chance. It wasn't the accident that the people that put the finger about what is nation, what is people, was not historians.
Why? Because historians are using what? Written documents. Who gave us these documents in the history? It's only a very teeny group of people, intellectuals of the past. You understand me? Now they build on these teeny documents national history that going far away for 4,000, 5,000 years. Nation is a modern product. People ask me, okay, after the exile, after this disappearance of the Jewish state in Palestine, we can say that Jewish people didn't exist. But before it, in the time of the Bible, in the time of the Second Temple, the Second Temple, it was a Jewish people there. I don't believe. And I ask you to try to imagine, before modern times, before 300 years, 400 years, every village spoke a different language. Without journals, without radio, without television, without schools, we can speak about the people? You understand me? Take, for example, a Judah kingdom in the beginning, or in the time of Jesus Christ. In the capital, in Jerusalem, most of the people spoke another language than the peasant. In the cities, all around, they speak a third language. Can we speak about the people at that time? Most of them didn't know that they belonged to a people. Most of the Frenchmen, 400 years ago, didn't know that they are Frenchmen. You know it?
Yeah.
You can imagine it, speaking about people 400 years ago? I don't believe. You understand? Without this kind of communication, you cannot speak about human groups, large human groups like in modern times. I don't know if I was clear enough. It's a little bit my third chapter that I think that you have to jump on it to come to the Zionist narrative, okay? It's a little bit too abstract, no? The chapter about what is nation, what is people, etc.
I knew, and then I knew.
Difficult questions. By the way, Rita Shapira, that attacked me, in the end she is going back to genetics. You see, it's very difficult to build a Jewish nation. Then in the last word, she's going to the DNA. You notice it. I mean, we have a blood, a common blood, more or less.
Your work fits in neatly with the teachings of Professor George Mossy, who I'm sorry is not alive to be aware, to read this. This fits in with German Romanticism. It's the same place, the same time, the importance of ideas and developing mythologies and so on that take on a life of their own. I think this is a very important part of that European history, given the time and the place of the origins of these ideas, of the creation of the idea of the Jewish people, the very need for it, or the purpose. I do have a little question, though. As an early reader, I read the books that we got that were sold as part of a bookseller's deal, stories from the Bible, which were all about the Old Testament. I did very well in catechism because I knew all of them, had read all of those. I'm curious, you point out that these old kingdoms and so on never even existed. Have you gotten any reaction from Christians who pay attention to this sort of thing?
Not all the kingdoms. There were kings that exist, I think.
Yeah.
Not Solomon, David, and all this. It was a very teeny kingdom, not like in the Bible. See, there were. By the way, I don't think that Jewish monotheism was in the first temple. I think the monotheism, the Jewish monotheism, sprang out only in the 5th century, more or less. This is my thesis in the book. I try. I'm not the first one. A lot of schools in Europe today are speaking about this. Now, about the Christian, their attitude to the book. I imagine that your Christians, evangelists in the United States, will not like it. Now, even Christian of the left can have a lot of problems with the book. I can imagine Jimmy Carter, that in the political bottom line, we have the same position today. He knows, one of the people in the United States knows exactly what is a Jewish state. When Bibi Netanyahu lately asked the Arab world and the Palestinian camp to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, Carter reacted very positively. He understands exactly why a Jewish state is not a democratic state. But I am afraid, if I'm going to send, I wanted to ask you to send it to Carter, Jimmy Carter. No, I'm sure that he will like a lot of parts, but he will have a problem with the Bible.
Yeah.
I was in Morocco 3 months ago. They invited me to speak in Morocco, in Casablanca and Rabat about the book. They were, delighted with the book, because of the critique of Zionism, because my deep solidarity with the Palestinians. They were happy. But they asked me, maybe the chapter of the Bible is too much? Very good people say, you put questions of the truth of the Bible, the historical basic of the Bible, but in this way you touch also the Quran. It was very astonishing to see how they like the other chapters and have problem with the first chapter. I imagine that Christian, the same thing, will behave the same thing, and it will be difficult for Carter. And I will write, if I can, jump on the second chapter and go forward. Now, one thing is important about the Bible. If you let me, one sentence more. People know that the Bible is the book of the Jew. Even the Islam is saying the Jewish are the people of the book. Yes, this is the term, the people of the book. The Bible, that is not a book, it's a library with a lot of contradiction, with a lot of other people that wrote other parts. It's a library, it's not a book. It's a collections of books. It's very interesting about this book that it's not a Jew that read it 2,000 years. It wasn't used by Jews. In the rabbinic schools, I'm speaking about yeshivas. You have a yeshiva here in New York, no?
Quite a few.
Yeah, a few of them.
More than a few.
You can check it. In the yeshivas, people during all the ages didn't read the Bible. You know it? Yeah. They know the first part of the Bible, the Torah. Not from the yeshivas, but from the lectures Saturday morning. But the Bible wasn't a text for the Jewishness. It was the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Gemara. Who read the Bible in the history? 2 groups of human beings. The first of them was the Karaite. You know what is Karaite? It was a Jewish, more or less, a Jewish sect in the 18th and 19th century after Jesus Christ. They didn't accept the Talmud. They stuck with the Bible and they read the Bible. They were very strong in Jerusalem, by the way. This is the first group. The second group was who?
Protestant.
Who read? Protestant. Not Catholic. Protestant discover in some age the book. And they prepare the field for another category to use the book as a historical text, the Zionist. The Zionist was the third category that read seriously the Bible. But the Bible is not a Jewish text. It's a little bit too extreme to say it. But go to the yeshivas, because you have it in New York, and ask them if they are reading and are working and analyzing the Bible text and the Bible stories. Thank you.
I just want to ask you something. I know that other people have their hands up too, but let me just get this out quick. It's a very basic shift in paradigm to think that the monotheistic ideas within the Judaic tradition arise not when we used to think they arose, namely the 12th century BCE, but the 5th century.
20th century BCE.
Or 20. But the 5th century BCE, and that's, I've read, Silverstein and Finkelstein and Silverman's book, which is interesting, and you have a nice criticism of that. But what's interesting to me also, and maybe you can comment a little about it, the 5th century BCE was a century of enormous religious creativity and of a great deal of cross-cultural exchange that we're only beginning to learn about. For instance, between Buddha, between Lao Tzu, in China, between Pythagoras, and
the same 5th century.
The same 5th century. So to me, that seems to be opens up a fantastically important area for scholarly and philosophical investigation. Could you comment a little on that?
Yeah, I think that the meeting between the Jewish, the meeting of the, I spoke before the fact that the exile didn't exist, but it was the first exile that is mentioned in the Bible about the Babylon exile. It happened they didn't take away a people, but they take away the political and intellectual elites to Babylon. And I think this event is the basic of the birth of Jewish or Yahwistic monotheism. The meeting between exiled people in the Zarathustra religion that was half or semi-monotheistic. You understand? This meeting, miraculous meeting, gave birth to the first real monotheism in the Western world. And it is the same time, the 5th century, that is a very, very important to all the culture in Western and Eastern world. Right. Why it's not established for this evening?
Very interesting. Yeah. Over there.
This fellow here, and then Max. It's 5 to 9, and we're going to start winding it down. So you and Max, and then Bertel.
More hot politically a little bit. No, I want to provoke you. It's too easy till now. No, I know. I came for a bunch of leftists in New York, and I want to confront myself politically with you a little. See?
Yes.
It will be much more interesting.
I had one question and one thought. The question of the DNA. I had read some years ago about the Khazarians and the Jewish people who had converted them, their conversion to Judaism, and the explanation was that these were the Ashkenazi of Europe, but it was seemingly contradicted by what looked like reliable DNA blood work that had been done and tied them to the Palestinians. Actually, I think they used as the base people. That these were they had so much in their DNA of people from Palestine that this idea of the people from Khazaria being the source of the Ashkenazi Jew was contradicted by that. So I'd like to know what the thought is on that. The second part is slightly in that vein. It has to do with Palestinians. You were saying that there is really not necessarily a real Palestinian people per se.
No, today no.
Today.
Yesterday.
Yeah.
No, today there is a Palestinian people.
I don't mean, but I mean
if you start to shoot,
I mean of yesterday. I'm talking about of yesterday. I had just briefly, I had read a report about the Black Death and how Black Death had somehow or the other immunized people genetically to AIDS, and that people could be exposed to the virus, and they were seemingly immune. No one seemed to understand what it was. They were, particularly in Australia for some reason, they traced their DNA back to areas in England where there had been Black Death, and it had seemingly immunized them. But that wasn't the point. The point was that those people who were living there in these areas over 600 years, had never traveled more than 15 miles from where they were born within 600 years. So I'm wondering if the Palestinians are not the Palestinians. Britain had roads and they could easily travel. Would that not also be true for the Palestinians who have less roads, less access? Would they not still be the genetic people of that area who've been there for time immemorial, basically? If it was true for Britons living within 15 miles of where they're born for 600 years?
Confirm what I said before. It confirms one thing, that the chances of a Palestinian to be a direct descendant of the old Hebrew, it's much greater than me and most of the people from Jewish origin in this room. But the fact, about the DNA, we have to be very careful about it. It's a beginning of a biological work. I politically and also scientifically opposed to all this research in Israel and my own university that I look forward to find the Jewish DNA. In a state that the Jew cannot marry the non-Jew, all research about finding the Jewish DNA is something stinky. You say stinky? Okay.
That's good enough. Stinky.
Okay?
Stinky.
Now, reading a lot of stuff about DNA, you have to understand about Jewish DNA, all this. I put in the notes, you can read the articles, critical articles about the way that research, biological research, they do it in Israel. It reminds me the end of the 19th century, that physical anthropologic work about heads, They were sure that the European heads, how we call it?
Oh, yeah.
Phonology and others kind of research at the end of the 19th century, it's the same level that the DNA of mass group today. Now, I agree that a lot of Palestinians of today are descendants of peasants that didn't move. Like in England, like in France. A lot of peasants, and they were the majority 2,000 years ago, didn't move. But you have to understand that this area that was a crossroad in the Middle East, a lot of people are coming to them. Every conqueror, take the wives. You understand me? That you can find. But it's better from this moment not to look forward to define peoples by the DNA. You agree with me, no?
I'm not sure.
You are not sure, okay. The German, and somebody mentioned, the deep identity politics of Germany from the 19th century was to base the definition of a nation, of a people, on the sources of the origins. It was also in France. It was also in the United States. But the basic identity politics were developed to a civic and politic identity, defining nations, people, etc. In Germany, in Poland, in Ukraine, they were stuck with the notion of origin till the 20th century. Zionism started to be developed in the same area that ethnic German nationalism was developed. It doesn't mean that Zionism is Nazism, but you can say that they have the same point de départ, the same basic, ideological basic to define modern groups, human groups in modern times. Then I am very careful, and I ask you to read in my notes all the articles. Till this book, I was sure that if the historians are not very serious, like me, the scientific persons are much more careful. Starting to reading articles of biology about the DNA, I discovered the stupidity is everywhere. Really, everywhere. Try to read it and see it closer.
We're going to take only a couple of more questions.
But I want to make it a little bit more political.
You want to make it just a second. I'm going to call on a half a dozen people, and it's going to be around 20 after 9 by then, and then we're going to go home. So here's the order: Max, Bertel, Dennis, John, and fella back there. Okay, and try to be contentious. Max, you're first.
I don't know how contentious it's going to be. First of all, thank you for coming tonight.
Yeah.
I guess I have a question around trying to relate the question of Palestine to U.S. activists and to people living within the United States. And we just had, on Monday, we had Columbus Day. We're going to have Thanksgiving in a few weeks from now. And, of course, the United States has its own historical narrative, right, made up and, for the most part, fictional. And I was wondering if maybe you and maybe or Joel or whatever could kind of comment on various either similarities or differences in these kind of, you say Israel has this key contradiction, which, of course, is related to it's a religious state, which the United States is not in that sense. But the United States, of course, has its own contradictions upon which its democracy is based. Genocide, slavery, indentured servitude, all the rest of it. I'm wondering if maybe you could... It's a way that I think especially younger activists are trying to relate to people within the United States and trying to explain U.S. history, the history, Palestinian history, and trying to figure out how to kind of... Yeah, anyway.
I will be short because I understand that people want to ask also. Very short. I don't think that Israel is a religious state. The ethnocratic state. Secular people, atheist people, are managing a religious politics. You understand? Using religion as a kind of criteria to define themselves. The weakness of Zionism is not to find secular culture or as a basic for the Jewish people. You understand me? It's not a religion. It's not because a religion tradition that we cannot marry with non-Jew in Israel. It was decided in 1947 by Ben-Gurion, that wasn't a religious person. He gave the right of marriage to the rabbinate, to the rabbis. But he wasn't a religious. It's not because of religion. It's not a religious state. It's ethnocratic. It's much worse, if you want, in some way. You know, it reminds me, Charles Maurras was one of the leaders of Action Française, one of the biggest anti-Semitic in France. He tried to define the belonging to the French people by religious terms. He said that the church is the basic of the French nation. He was an atheist. He was an atheist. He tried to define the French nation by the church, and he was an atheist. It's the same case with Zionism. Most of the Zionists were atheists. They tried to define because he didn't have a choice. And it's still now. You understand me? Now, about Thanksgiving and all this, it's very hypocrite. But it's better a hypocrisy than this kind of political identity that I'm living till now in Israel. You understand me? We don't have a Thanksgiving with the natives. You understand? Okay.
Very quickly, Max raises a really important point that we're not going to get very far into, but we don't spend nearly enough time on, which is to explore the common roots of settler colonial societies, especially Israel and the United States. And that is so salient given the enormous influence played by Christian Zionism as well as Jewish Zionism in the support of Israeli colonization and its various shortcomings, shall we say. The connections are enormously interesting. It would take hours and hours to explore. Just a couple of quick points. The Puritan settlers from settled Massachusetts Bay and the Connecticut colony were theocrats. This was a religious state so far as they were concerned. And it was also a religious state that they wanted to build on Old Testament, and they said Hebraic lines. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to the United States than the Puritans, but the Puritan elites from Massachusetts Bay do form kind of an axial notion, of American identity, and that is carried forward in many ways, much too complex to take up here. Also, of course, South Africa is a society of settler colonials, Afrikaners, or Protestants. And just to add one last thing, the Puritan settlers in Massachusetts Bay believe themselves to be the 13th tribe of Israel. It's that simple.
Jonathan, and then Bertel. John?
Can you give also the right to this young guy there?
You're going to be third. Jonathan, you're first.
All right. Shlomo, thank you. I was just going to make you do the work. I've read, didn't quite understand Gabriel Pitterberg's review in New Left Review, but he seemed to be quite annoyed with you. So if you're asking for contentiousness, I would ask you to take both sides and explain to me why Pitterberg is annoyed with you and why he's wrong or right.
I will make it very, very simple. Wrote a critical man in the New Left Review.
Yes.
Now, Gabi Pitterberg, that I met him 3 days ago in L.A., he's a Jew, ex-Israeli Jew, anti-Zionist.
Yes.
A lot of Jews that are living not in Israel, that are anti-Zionist, didn't know to handle my book. They didn't know how to confront. By the way, a lot of parts of the Pitterberg critic I didn't understand. But he was annoyed. It was clear that something disturbed him. He's a very nice guy. Politically, we are very close. But it also was a reaction in some parts of the anti-Zionists in Israel. They want to keep this position of Jewishness, pure Jewishness and anti-Zionist Jewishness, to keep this identity of a Jew, a wandering Jew, like Walter Benjamin, like Hannah Arendt, is very chic. You understand me?
Yes.
Now, there is also a mental problem. He's not mad. But he's living in LA. And he started to feel more and more he's a Jew. You understand? But he's anti-Zionist. He stopped to be Israeli. He has problems with the book. It wasn't clear for me. I tried to ask him 3 days ago, what is the problem? But there is a few sensibilities, and I want to jump to something to make it a little bit more problematic, my discourse. I don't know if to wait to the question about the political project of a lot of you. But you see, there is a few sensibility in the critique of Zionism in Israel. Last year, writing this book, I decided not to define myself as an anti-Zionist. I was once an anti-Zionist. Today, I prefer to define myself as a post-Zionist or non-Zionist for one reason, a very tactical reason. Somebody that defines themselves today in the world as anti-Zionist, people translated it immediately to be against the existence of the Israeli state. It's true or not? More or less.
Yes.
Okay? I was all my life anti-Zionist. Writing this book in a very radical fashion, in a radical analysis historically, I decided politically to be much more clear. Why I cannot define myself as anti-Zionist? Because I don't put on question the existence of the Israeli state. I put, and I'm against Israeli state as a Jewish state. I want that Israel will become the state of their citizens. You understand me? But the difference between me and Gabi Pitterberg, Ilan Pape, is that these guys that living outside now of Israel has the same position that I heard yesterday, and it shocked me, has Zizek analyzed the conflict. It's Zizek. It was very easy for Zizek to say, not only that he's for one state solution, but one state exists. Now, I don't know if you know this position. I think that Kovel, I opened the internet, and I knew more or less who is Kovel, that I'm going to be confronted with him. With the question of Peterberg, that I imagined that he is also for one state solution. In my book, if somebody will finish it, it's not so easy. But you will see that my critique about Zionism is differently than Zizek and others today in the Western world. I want to de-Zionize the Israeli state. I don't think that the project of one-state solution is a serious political program today in the Middle East. Why? I think that it's childish. I'm sorry. Zizek is a very interesting thinker, but I think he's a childish. Why childish? You see, a one-state solution is a very, very good solution for the conflict. Morally, I am for a one-state solution. Ethically, it was a question for me. I'm living much better with Arabs than with Jews in Israel today. You can imagine after this book. It's clear. Now, but I stayed a little bit Leninist. Because I am speaking before a lot of Marxists here, I want to remind you the discussion between Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg. I always liked much more Rosa Luxemburg than Lenin. But in the field of nationalism, nation, political identity, modern political identity, Lenin was much more clever than Rosa Luxemburg. It's pity for me, but I think it's a fact. Now, why I'm not for a one-state solution? Politically, not ethically. It's very important to understand. Because I say to build a one-state today, to propose a one-state, is to looking for the agreement of the two parts. I'm right or not? You cannot, one moment, you cannot impose of the Israelis, Jewish or Israelis, to become from a day to tomorrow a minority in their state. Why not? Because they have nuclear power, a lot of reasons. It's too late to come to it. Why not? Why not? Because I'm a Leninist in this field. To impose on Israel to go out from all the occupied territories, I don't look for the agreement of the Israelis. You understand me? Any means is justified to throw out Israel from all the occupied territories because they are living there, people without any political civic rights. You understand me? Any means of pressure, of sanction is justified in my eyes. But to propose to the Israelis to become citizens of a state of Ismailaniya, it's not a real political proposition. You understand me? It cannot be today. It's reinforced the Zionism, ethnocentric Zionism in Israel. After the 20th century, to propose them to become, as a project, as a political project, like Zizek said, I don't understand. To impose of the, I'm a northern Zionist and I propose to de-Zionize the Israeli state. But there is the difference. To de-Zionize the Israeli state, it has to become from inside. You understand me? Not from outside. I don't know if I was clear about this question.
I must say something because he called my name into question, and I am for one state solution, and I don't believe in the right of the state of Israel to exist, because I don't believe any state has the right to exist. But especially states that commit human rights crimes on an expanding scale. That's the way we felt about South Africa. That's the way we should feel about Israel. However, I also hear you say, Shlomo, that you're post-Zionist and you want to give up, you want to de-Zionize the Israeli state, which means it's no longer a Jewish state.
Sure.
Now, if that's the case, And if it's a democratic state, then it's not going to be a Jewish state, and it's going to be a state of all its people, all its citizens. It's the only way to think of such a state, which means you're going to end up with the one-state solution, maybe with a different name and a different route that different roads go to Rome, etc. So I don't see that you're making a real distinction there. You say that the Israeli state should be de-Zionized. Well, if that's so, Zionism means that the destiny of the Jewish people resides in a Jewish state in Israel, a state that has a majority of Jewish people and whose government is dedicated for the preservation of Jews all over the world. Now if you de-Zionize it, it's going to be a one state. And how it happens, it's not going to happen in any singular way. It's going to happen from within, it's going to happen from without. And yes, it might not happen because of the nuclear arsenal and the terrible violence built into that structure, but that's the legacy we have. That's the heritage we're left with. That's the mess we have to clean up, and we can't turn away from it. We have to figure out how to do it without that kind of violence, but the end is a single state.
No, but I don't want to wait
till
the Israelis will accept one-state solution to throw them out from all the occupied territories, because people are living 42 years without any rights. The Arabs in Israel.
Well, that's another way.
The Arabs in Israel are citizens, not citizens like I want that they will be, not citizens that the state belong to them. But it's quite different situation between the Arab and Israeli citizens in the 42 years of people that have not any rights. Now, mixing the two things, mixing politics with utopia, in my position is, because I'm an old guy that passed a lot of things, I think to try to replace politics by utopia is dangerous. We can arrive to Pol Pot, to Mao, to a lot of things. Making politics without utopia is bringing us to Bush, to Sarkozy, and Bibi Netanyahu. But it's very important to know, in some way I'm a Leninist, not a real one, but you see, I'm living there. When you say one state solution, why one state? Why the Palestinian Jordani? A lot of Palestinians, the majority of the citizens, the subject, not citizens because it's a kingdom. The majority of subjects in Jordani are Palestinian. You know it, no? Then why one state solution, not with the Jordani also? Because they are Palestinians. One thing is very important to me politically. I think that the solution of two states has to be kept by the left, non-Zionist, anti-Zionist, to insist about it, to fight for evacuate Israel from all the occupied territories, to help any initiative to do it. But the day that we arrive to take out the Israeli militaries from the occupied territories, for me, will be the first day to fight for a confederation between Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians. Because in the end, and I agree with Kovel, ethically, we cannot live in the Middle East without the Arabs. I try everywhere to say that this formula of Amos Oz, you know, is Amos Oz. Excuse me, this is childish. You understand me? It's childish to propose the Jewish Israelis to become from a day to tomorrow a minority. Why? It's a different to ask people stop to be racist and to propose them politically to become a minority in their own state. You understand the difference? The perspective, historical process, yes. Political program, no.
I can say more, but I think we should open it up.
We're winding it down. I had promised I'd call on Bertel and the fellow behind him. Bertel, go on.
I have a question which relates to what we've been discussing. I have a question which
Yeah.
relates to what we've been discussing, but first I like you to say a few more words about the mass conversions which occurred to Judaism over the last 2,000 years. Because in many ways, this is the most interesting, most provocative, and most convincing part of the argument. That there was another way for most of the Jews of the world to be born and to come to exist. And this, you mentioned it, but you mentioned the word Khazar, but hardly anyone here has read your book. And this is really a very big part of your book. So I would ask you to say just a few words about the Khazars, the Berbers, and the Yemenites in terms of what happened. Secondly, let me just get my second question. And this connects to what's been discussed here. After your masterful, really masterful presentation, which shows that the Jewish history, Judaism has invented its history, I think it has to be asked, what is left, if anything, not just of Zionism, but of Israel and indeed of Judaism as a rationale? Now, you've been arguing about how impractical it is to try to get rid of Israel as a state, which is what the one-state solution suggests. But if it's been deprived of its rationale for being a state, which is what you've done so masterfully, this really doesn't allow any other discussion to take place other than what's practical, but what's practical changes in time with new conditions, not only in Israel, in the world. So you may have, in fact, through your own analysis, undermine what your own political position is in terms of what you would like to see, because you insist that that's what's practical now. There's no more rationale, there's no more reason they can give other than they have bombs, other than that people...
Only one rationale.
Well, but the point is this, they had this old rationale.
There is a rationale.
You've taken away the rationale.
There is a rationale. It's very
to understand. I repeat before Zionists the fact. They insist that the Jewish people exist. Why? Because if you use the term Jewish people, these Jewish people, from Madoff to Joe Lieberman, has a right on the land. The people has a land, no? You understand? Consciously, unconsciously, you are speaking about the people. You are speaking that these people has a right of property. You understand me? Even unwillingly. I tried to explain it yesterday to Rabbi Lerner. That even unwillingly, when you use the word Jewish people, you give a right of property to the Jewish in the world on Palestine. Now, what is the rationale to recognize the Israeli state? You know, Zionism, as I said before, create two peoples, two nations in the Middle East. The Zionist colonization create the Palestinian people and also the Israeli people. This is the rationale. They create an Israeli people there. I don't accept the borders of these people. You understand me? The way they decide who is inside and who is outside. But one thing is important. There is an Israeli culture. There is an Israeli language. There is an Israeli theater. There is an Israeli cinema. It's not a Jewish cinema. You don't understand our language. You understand me? But they succeeded to build a nation. They invented the people to the past, and they create a nation, but they don't want to recognize the Israeli nation. Zionism don't want to recognize, like a lot of Arab nationalists, don't want to recognize that they succeeded to build a nation. You understand me? With all the characteristics of a nation. This is the reason. This is rational. I try to deconstruct all the legitimation of Zionist colonization. But as I was asked in the Al-Quds University, after writing this book, how you can ask us, the Palestinian, it was in Al-Quds University, Sereno Seba invited me. And before me was a Palestinian professor, most of them ex-prisoners. And they asked me, how, after writing this book, you can ask us to recognize the Israeli state. Even if not a Jewish state, but you ask to recognize this historical fact. Then I answer immediately, without thinking very far. A part of them were very Muslims. Then I say that even in the Muslim tradition, a child that was born by a rape has a right to live. Israel is a rape of Palestinian or Arab population. Zionist colonization, a kind of rape to other population. It's clear, but a child that was born from a rape has a right to live. You have to educate this child not to repeat the act of his father. But Israel is doing worse than their fathers did. But it doesn't change the fact that we have to recognize this child. For Zionism, this child is not a legitimate son. You understand me? Because if we will speak about the Israeli people or Israeli nation, we finish with Zionism. You understand me? I'm clear or not? I started to be very tired. Okay.
What? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know, but
Sorry, one moment. About the Khazar, Bertel, I'm sorry. Now, I will come back next time after people will read the book. In 2 months, okay? It's a very difficult book. 2 months, okay? January, I will come back and I make it much more larger, if you want. My analysis about the origins of most of the Jewish in the world. Now, I put in the book a lot of evidence and a lot of notes. It's very, very tiring to go down every time to the note, You put it in the same page that people are going down. It was better maybe in the end. No? Okay. Now, I put a lot of evidence, a lot of material to show. Till I was 40, I didn't know, for example, the existence of a Jewish kingdom in Yemen in the 5th century after Jesus Christ. You can imagine a historian, an Israeli historian, don't know about a Jewish kingdom in Yemen. For example, not only Khazars, the Chemyar. They attack me about Khazars, but they don't mention the Zionist historian, the Chemyar. Why Chemyar kingdom? It's a Jewish kingdom. Nobody is speaking in Israel about it. Chemyar was a Jewish kingdom in the 5th century. This is the reason that we have Yemeni Jewish in Israel, like Yigal Amir. You know who is Yigal Amir? The guy that killed Rabin. He was from Jewish Yemenite origin, with the nice hair, how we call it, frisé.
Curly.
Huh?
Kinky. Kinky.
Kinky?
Yes.
No,
Tight curls.
It's very nice hair.
You have something.
The Yemenite has it. It's not because of the wind of the Red Sea that it's become curious. I wanted to send the book to Yigal Amir in the prison to know a little bit about his origin. It's not bad to know some notions about the origins, no? In the end, I didn't send it because he's lonely in the prison to make his life worse. Then I left it. About the Khazars, there are a lot of material, especially Arab sources. Now, the Zionism historiography, till the 60s, didn't stop to speak about the fact that you cannot explain demographically the fact that most of the Jewish at the beginning of the 20th century came from Eastern Europe. You cannot explain it without the theory of the Khazar. They knew it. But from 67, after occupied all the territories in Jerusalem, they arrived to the conclusion that the people that dominate Jerusalem cannot be the descendant of Khazar soldiers of the 9th century after Jesus Christ. You understand? But all the material I took from Zionist historiography. 50 years ago, they didn't hesitate to write about it. You understand me? A lot of material. Bertel, I cannot come in, but there is reasons why a few kingdoms, very important kingdoms, become Judaized by conversion along the years in the Arab world, in the North Africa, and in Ukraine, in Russia. I insist in my book, and this is very difficult for a lot of anti-Semitic racists. The Jewish were in North Africa before the Arabs arrived there. Jewish were in France before the Frank invaded it. The Jewish were in Ukraine and Russia before Russians were Russians. You understand me? A lot, you know, this theory that the Jewish is a strange foreign people that came to invade us, this is the basic of anti-Semitism. I show in the book that the Jewish were the real natives everywhere, not in America.
All right, we're going to...
I have to go, unfortunately.
Joel has to go. One real quick question, and then we're going to break up because it's 20 to 10.
Yeah, I really have to go.
Palestinian refugee as stateless. I want to ask you that, what's your position on refugees if you don't espouse the one-state solution? How do you, it seems that you don't consider the fact that half the Palestinians are refugees, whether in historical Palestine or in places other than Jordan, like Syria, Lebanon, all the way to New York, live as stateless people. How do you factor that into your two-state prescription? That's one thing. And another thing, how do you feel if, I mean, the comparison with apartheid is I think, apt and appropriate here. If the white supremacists or Afrikaner of South Africa were asked to give up the power that they had, they would never probably do that. And the metaphor was they're sitting on top of a raging tiger. Once they get off it, I mean, racist as it is, once they'll get off it, it'll tear them apart. The same stands for the Palestinian-Israeli situation. What with this as a preface, what do you think a boycott campaign against Israel would do? Whether or not it will convince people, de-Zionize people, or maybe be a step, maybe if not tomorrow, the day after, a step towards a de-Zionized historical Palestine.